Elizabeth for quite a while in Flanders and in Antwerp.
On this case, I was up 5 minutes later.
Okay, I'd like to call to order the March 22nd, 2017 meeting of the Moscow Planning and Zoning Commission, and begin with approval of the minutes of our March 8th meeting. Does anybody have any additions, corrections, deletions for those minutes?
I'll make a motion we approve them.
Is there a second?
Kurt just seconded.
Okay, Kurt just seconded, and okay, Dennis approved, or made the motion. So all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, minutes carry. Correspondence, is there any correspondence from staff? Michael?
Nothing from staff this evening.
Okay. And Joel is not here to give us a Transportation Commission meeting report update. Do you have anything you might want to convey, either Walter or Michael, on what the Transportation
Well, they
Commission's
canceled
up
the
to?
last meeting, so they probably haven't met.
Oh, okay. They meet tomorrow, probably. Right, because I remember they weren't going to meet the Thursday after
Yeah.
the blizzard, right? Yeah. Okay. All right. So now we've reached the point in our agenda called Open Microphone, and this is an opportunity for members of the public to come and speak to the Commission about matters that aren't currently pending before us. And is there anyone in the audience who would like to participate in that? All right. Well, for those of you who might be listening, this is an opportunity to come down and talk to us about what might be on your mind that's not on our agenda. Okay. Moving to item 6, we have Michael's going to give a initial presentation on our identity planned unit development on Main Street. And so.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners. So this is the Identity of Maine at the South Couplet project. It was approved preliminarily June 22nd, 2016. The Commission conducted a public hearing and approved Identity on Maine with 5 conditions, and it was a mixed-use plan unit development, contained 154 multifamily residential units as part of the preliminary PUD. That included 5 residential buildings, another separate commercial building that's 3,000 square feet in size, which was on the old Domino's Pizza property, Sharp Oil property. That included 3 tenant spaces within that commercial building. And then there was a bicycle storage facility as part of the preliminary PUD. Also included was a pretty substantial automobile reduction that the applicant had submitted a parking mitigation plan for, and included in that mitigation plan was short and long-term bicycle parking. So they had short-term various racks scattered throughout the development, as well as long-term. They had that bicycle storage building that was dedicated to storage of bicycles within the building, and then you have some storage within some of the existing, or some of the proposed 5 residential buildings within the corridors there. Also included in the parking mitigation plan was a proposal for initially 1 car share. The Commission put that condition on there that there be 2 car shares as part of this development, and these are similar to like zip cars that you see at both campuses here in town. And then as part of that was designated parking as well, so the applicants indicated that they're going to be renting the parking spaces to the tenants of this development. So the conditions that P&Z imposed that I just mentioned was, 1, that the applicant provided 2 car share vehicles on site, and then we wanted to track the usage. So there was some resistance for providing 2, or the ability to be able to get 2 on the property, which the developer indicated that could be a bit of a challenge to have a company that would dedicate 2 cars on this project. And so they initially proposed 1. Staff was recommending 2, and the Commission ended up imposing that condition to have 2 car shares with the condition that it be reviewed and tracked by staff So they submit reports, and then 2 years after the certificate of occupancy, staff can review the usage and determine to allow the number of car share vehicles to be reduced based upon the documented usage of those vehicles. The second condition imposed was the applicant work with the Parks and Rec Department in order to satisfy the parkland dedication requirements of the PUD. Third was any mitigation required by Idaho Transportation Department needed to be completed. Fourth was regarding the public utilities, so the water, sewer mains. Public Works requires those to be in minimum width easements, and so the Public Works just needed to verify that. And then the last condition was that in regards to a public water main, for fire suppression on the site, sometimes that you need to loop that connection for water quality and redundancy purposes, and Public Works is currently monitoring that. They're running it through a modeling system in order to verify whether it needs to be looped, but all indications say that it will need to be looped through the development, so they're planning on making those changes. So earlier in March, on the 3rd, the applicant submitted the final PUD to be reviewed by Planning and Zoning. So just a reminder here, final PUD is really intended to give the Commission an opportunity to determine whether the proposed development conforms to the intents of the preliminary approvals, conforms to the required conditions that were imposed, so those 5 conditions, and also it provides an opportunity to give a little bit more detail as the projects evolve through some of the construction drawings. So we had some more information on Highway 95 striping. I know there's a bit of discussion about what that was going to do. There was going to be that southbound left-hand turn lane that was required as part of the improvements to 95, and there was a little bit of concern that the highway is possibly going to have to be, the curb line was going to have to be widened in that area, and so we've got some more information on that, as well as some more detailed construction drawings which show some topographical constraints and some other constraints on the site that affect the design slightly. So this is the property, about 6 acres in size, highlighted in blue on your screen there. You've got Main Street, Highway 95, Troy Highway running southeast here. Have Paradise Path that goes through the property. All this vegetation here is Paradise Creek. Ends up going under the highway and then going through Legacy Crossing area. Sweet Avenue is directly across the street with the University of Idaho campus. Just a closer view of the property. This is the old Domino's Pizza property here. This was the preliminary PUD site plan that was submitted, and we just had transposed that on the area to get an idea of how that's going to fit in with the surrounding properties. This was the just a plan view of the site plan that was submitted, and this was the site plan submitted for the final PUD. So you can see a little bit of a modification to Building A here. They had an entryway corridor that accessed the courtyard via the south originally, so they had amended that slightly, and so access is going to be off of that southeast corner. But overall, it retains the basic shape of what it was originally designed. You see the 3 townhouse-style buildings, B, C, and D, that are located along the path. There was previously what they were calling Building E, which was kind of just shoehorned into, looks like a landscape area here, that only contained 3 5-bedroom units. There was with the new site plan, you can see there's a pretty substantial retaining wall, and that begins about right here. There's quite a bit of slope as you head to the south here, and so they needed to retain that slope, and it actually goes onto the property. So there's a retaining wall that goes from about 3 feet on the western side and then increases to about 10 feet over here. So there's a modification that needed to happen with this parking. So they originally, just viewing it as a flat lot, just had parking all the way out to this southeastern portion of the property, and then with the inclusion of that retaining wall, they had to reconfigure that a little bit in order to put the wall and then shift some of that parking to the north side. So you can see with the wall they had to put there, they shift the parking to the north and then eliminated Building E as part of that, and then ended up gaining a few more parking spaces there from what they ended up losing from that southeastern corner. So that was kind of one of the more significant modifications to the plan. Everything else is as they had originally submitted it. They have some more detail on some dumpster locations, various dumpsters throughout the development. Those had to be slightly canted a little bit in order to satisfy LSI requirements for having a garbage truck go through the property. They had to add one over here for the commercial development. Commercial, 3,000-foot commercial has been reduced slightly. It's around 2,900 square feet, and so it's pretty much the same footprint floor plan that was submitted originally, and then you still have the bicycle storage building there. So those are the primary changes that have happened. This is a closer view of the west side of the development, so just building A, B, C, and then you can see just the modification to building A there. Southeast side of the development. This really hasn't changed much. They have like I mentioned before, they've got the refuse area for the dumpster, and that's just changed slightly there, but everything else is, for the most part, remained the same. And this is the southeast corner where we have that retaining wall that's required there, and then the changes in the plans with removal of building E. So these were the original conceptual elevations that were submitted as part of the preliminary PUD, just showing it looking southeast from Highway 95, Main Street, looking eastward. This is along the path, looking at those townhouse buildings, B, C, and D. Else?
Just a tiny little question. Do you think we're going to be able to keep the path open during construction? Has that been discussed at all?
Well, it hasn't been discussed, but I would imagine that
I want to watch it being built, and of course, I need to be on the path.
Yeah, I mean, they should be able to keep it open. They'll have to, anytime we have a sidewalk or a road closure, they have to submit a permit in order to do that.
Right.
So, and part of that needs to be some type of detour
Just pretty
mitigation.
tight is
So,
all.
yeah.
I just thought about it over as we looked.
Yeah, I think they'll probably go, one building at a time, and I'm sure we can work around it somehow. So this is from the Sweet Avenue intersection with 95. Looking northeast, that would be the commercial, 3,000 square foot commercial component. This is building A that you're looking at. They've got the leasing office right here in the ground floor, and then residential behind or and above. Kind of an overview looking to the northeast. And then these were the conceptual elevations that they had submitted for the preliminary PUD. And these are the elevations for the final. So buildings essentially remain the same. The only modification, so they have the same color palette and everything. These are just in black and white what they submitted with the construction drawings, but they'll have the same color palette and everything that they have on these preliminary PUD elevations. The only thing that I was able to identify that's changed were the balconies on some of these. Yeah. So, you have the 95 side that has, they have still retained all the balconies. So when you're going street side, going up North Main or South Main, heading northbound, that elevation will still have all the balconies, as well as that southwest corner above the leasing office. And then as you go, so this is the private drive that leads to the east part of the development. So this is proposed to have, they've got some awnings, some features there, but they've removed at least some of the balconies in this elevation and then continued those on that east and the north elevation. So there's at least one elevation where they've removed those. I think the developer had indicated they'd run into some issues in the past with balconies, and I think it's primarily has to do with just students and college students and balconies, and I think that was the primary reason. I think he had planned to make some changes with the balconies on the project.
You're leaving something out of that equation, aren't you, Mike?
I can't speculate.
So on one side of the building, they behave well, and on the other, they don't?
Yeah, I guess
Quite follow that logic.
on the primary frontage they have, and then the portions that are screened from view, they've
Gotcha.
removed the balconies.
I think balconies and cost may be more significant than balconies and throwing children out.
Could be. Yeah, it could be. I think you always have the issue of a parking lot below balconies and dropping cigarette butts and bottles and whatever else could fall off of a balcony onto a parking lot.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
I think they have, I can see a lot of reasons why they want balconies, but they are, a nice
Relief.
yeah, from the facade. So, and then this is looking at the leasing office. So this would be the drive that leads back to the parking area and the parking in front, and then this would be same elevation there, just a different angle. And then this would be, so they've, the buildings, for the most part, the same. It's just that the balconies, this is that same side where the balconies have been removed. And then you see
Well, one thing that's odd is if that's the southwest elevation for green building purposes, you want the shading that balconies offer to fenestration more on the southwest side than on the north. So I guess I would question that one. I guess I would question the logic behind that.
Yeah, and this would be more, I guess, southeast. The building.
It says southwest on the label, but
Yeah, and it's I think it's intended to be, this elevation here,
okay.
because you have the main entrance to the development. And then this is, I think, southwest here, so this would be, along kind of this along Main Street. You can view the leasing office here, and then this is the portion that still has the balconies there.
So they must have the elevations mislabeled by compass direction or something? 'Cause
Yeah,
that says northwest
Yeah.
to south.
And that, I noticed that with the architect before, that they had, just because of the overall angle of the buildings,
Right, okay.
it was more of, because you have north, it's really at this angle, and then it's kind of cocked on the site in an odd fashion, and so, when they were labeling it, it kind of made sense when you looked at it, but they were getting that off a little bit on their labels. So.
It's at such an angle, so they have noted that it's like Highway 95 elevation or the Highway 8 elevation is a better way to do it, because it's kind of it's not easy, and it's such an unusual site that it doesn't seem like part of the grid at all.
Yeah. So looking at the Building A floor plan, we have the leasing office, there's a fitness center, lounge, study room, and then numerous residential units. There's about 91 that were identified in the preliminary PUD floor plan. So they were broken down into quite a few one-bedroom units, so 25 of those. They had 57 two-bedroom units, and then a handful of three-bedroom and four-bedroom units to round that out. They had shifted that around a little bit in this final PUD, so they've reduced the number of units, but they've increased the bedrooms in those units. So they went from 91 to 72, but the mixture is quite a bit different. So they have 13 one-bedrooms, so they about cut those in half, reduced the two bedrooms by about a third, so they went from 57 to 31. Three bedrooms, increased those to 7 from 2. And then four bedrooms, about doubled those from 7, went to 14. And then the number of five-bedroom units they didn't have previously. They only had, I think, 3 five-bedroom units in that very small building that they had removed. And it looks like they had relocated those and then increased those as part of the final PUD. So they went up to 7 5-bedrooms in this plan.
Did the number of bedrooms pretty much stay the same, though?
It stayed about the same. Yeah, I've got a parking calculation, and it was maybe there was 2 more bedrooms than previous. What was previously submitted, but it was roughly the same. So this was the floor plan that was originally submitted. It was ground floor of Building A. You can see it's fairly well stayed the same. You have the same arrangement of leasing office, fitness center, and study area there. And then you have the internal hallways that make a U around the first floor, and then surrounded by a mixture of units on either sides of the hallways there. Elevators in the main lobby there. So pretty much the same from, we have that change in where the corridor is for the courtyard, which enters from the south, where it was previously going through that west, or I guess the south side is what it would be. And it changed to the east, entering here. So the second floor, pretty much the same. So it's going to be pretty much the same except for just the mixture of number of bedrooms within the units is really the only thing that's changed, with the exception of just the entrance to the courtyard on the east side. And it looks like they previously had some type of rooftop patio space on the 3rd floor. That's also been removed as part of this plan. So they replaced that with a dwelling unit. These are the townhouse style, so B, C, and D. These buildings have pretty much stayed the same, so there hasn't really been any changes. I think the only change was there was a on the south side that abuts the parking lot. They had this external stairwell. You can see the railings in between, and they've just enclosed that just on this side. So what was previously this area, you can see that they've enclosed those just on the south side. But the north elevation that's adjacent to the path has largely remained the same. So that's that elevation there, and that was what was originally submitted. So they'll have the same color palette and everything. These buildings have pretty much stayed the same. These are the ends of those units that were portrayed at the preliminary PUD, and those have virtually stayed the same as well. I don't think there's been any changes on those. And then the floor plans, there was originally 3-bedroom and 4-bedroom units, and then there was 20 units per building. That's remained the same as well. So they just have a mixture of 3 and 4 bed units, and then there's 20 per building. 4 stories. And then this was what was formerly Building E, that 5-bedroom unit building at the southeast corner, and this is the building that's been removed. Brings us to the elevation of the commercial building. So this is from the west, from Main Street looking east. So you see the 3 tenant spaces. One here, and one there. And this would be looking from the east, from the parking lot, the one to the south there. And this has virtually stayed the same as well. So really no changes. Slight modification to the square footage, but it was just really minimal. And that was just to account for, I think, a more accurate analysis of what the square footage was with all the facade articulations.
They're in the units. Each unit has one.
So this is the north elevation. So these remain the same as well. So looking at the north from that private drive that comes in at the coffee area, commercial area here, and then this is to the south, adjacent to that development. Floor plan that was submitted preliminarily, this has remained the same as well. And I don't believe they originally had a elevation for the bike parking building. So this is just what was submitted for that. You can see all the bike parking contained on the inside of it, up against the wall. So they've got some vertical hangers here, and then they've got some horizontal that are stacked right on top of each other there as part of their system. I think they've got about 150 spaces within this building for long-term bike storage. Brings us to the landscape plan. So these were just landscape plans that were submitted. I think they had hired a landscape architect out of California to put these together. And then once everything went through the preliminary PUD stage, they ended up contracting with Pat O'Connell, who's here to answer any questions about getting a landscape plan that actually has landscaping and trees and shrubs and ground cover that's available in this area, because a lot of the plantings that they specify in these plans are hard to get around here or don't do well with our climate in the area. So they hired Pat to do a plan as well, and a large portion of it revolves around just xeriscaping. So this is the plan that he submitted. Actually, probably quite a bit more plants as part of this plan. So there really hasn't been that substantial of changes. There are, the buffers that were on the south. We have that retaining wall picking up here. He's indicated there will be some type of covering on that, like ivy that will grow up onto the wall. But obviously we can't put shrubs on top of a retaining wall, so that would be pretty much the major change, other than just swapping out all the plantings that are shown on here with ones that are found within our area.
I have a question about that, Mike, since we're working on parking lot standards and landscaping, and we aren't completely through that process. How would that impact this development proposal if we were to work our parking lot landscaping standards through the system?
Well, it would it'd mainly be the islands.
Right.
So
Exactly.
it'd be the internal parking lot landscaping. Here it's parking is at a premium, so that would be the issue, is trying to balance,
Right.
the waiver of some of the parking with increased landscaping within the parking lot. So, when we were going through the landscape standards, that's the first thing I was thinking about, was that, the lack of islands as part of this development. And it was just that, they were so short on parking that it was hard to say, well, let's get some more islands in here when they were that short. And so, it would be quite a bit, quite a few more islands that would be required as part of
I
this.
think you can notice that, but because the site is so narrow, I'm not too challenged by that particular problem, because if you have 4 or 5 rows of cars across a parking lot, it's a whole nother thing. And so and of course you don't even see from the road, you won't see it. So it seems to me like the narrowness of the parking lot allows us to be just a little bit more liberal.
Yeah, this is one of those examples where you have an oddly shaped parking lot for the most part, and you have quite a bit of vegetation. You have quite a bit of existing old growth vegetation along this south side here. So you have a lot of large trees back there, and so this long linear shape of the parking lot, when you have some islands that break it up, and then you have quite a few trees up against the buildings, and then along the path, probably goes quite a long way to break that up than what you'd normally see with a symmetrical parking lot.
But if this gets approved before we put the new parking standards in, this gets to do it the way it's approved, right?
Oh yeah. This is a PUD anyway, so we're allowed to make modifications to the plan. This is just typically you have a requirement that there be a 3-foot buffer on that south side with shrubs every 2 feet, and that's why they all along the south side they had that on there. With the requirement for that retaining wall on the south side, I just don't know how you end up pulling that off with those on top of the retaining wall. And so this is kind of the opportunity after they've gone through the construction drawings and to see some of those site constraints to come back and say that, well, it really isn't going to work here for plantings, and so we can shift those to another location and make up for it that way.
Could you clarify where the old growth trees are? They're on, where
They're
are
on
we?
the adjacent property, so
okay.
Chuck Bond's property here,
I see.
and that comes in. They're all along the south side,
Okay.
right along this area right here.
Would our landscape, would you like to make a comment at all about what you see here in the project?
Yeah, can you hear me from here?
You gotta come
Well,
up- you gotta come up here.
okay, we could do it, or we could
It's
open.
not a hearing.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Oh, is it? Are we
think
having
so.
a hearing?
Yeah.
Oh, I
You didn't say it was a hearing?
I misunderstood. Well, usually Mike presents first, so that's fine. I'm sorry, I was mixed up on that.
Yeah, for those that don't know me, I'm Pat O'Connell. I've been doing this since like 1977 in town. So what the understanding, at first we were talking about buffering that retaining wall, but I think with the process of the parking lot, not really having a planter between the end of the pavement and the beginning of the retaining wall. There's also going to be a fence on some of that retaining wall. So in terms of any landscaping, I don't know how much would really be viewable. I put a couple Amur maples up there. Once we get them going, like the first or second year, they'll be able to handle that drought tolerance. So we could probably even run a couple drip lines up to it. If it gets to the point where we were talking first ivy up there, the owner didn't really like that. He didn't want people's dogs eating on it or whatever. I never knew it to be a problem, but we could probably put maybe blue rug juniper up above the wall because it will cascade quite nicely if there's a problem with it being too massive. I'd have to have enough room from the bottom of the fence. I don't know what type of fence that they're thinking of putting in, if it's going to be like a wood panel fence. But you'd have to lift it up kind of like flood pennants so that anything that's going to cascade over can get underneath those pickets and drop on down. But blue rug juniper would do quite well on that. In terms of the vegetation, it looks like a lot, but I had to get all the overstory, mid-story, shrubs, ground cover, everything. So I like to plant in like a relationship. Say all the trees are going to be kind of a columnar type, like all the major trees, a capital pear, bowhall maple, columnar hornbeam, things that are going to stay within the planter. I see a lot of problems in town. You have a 4 to 8 foot parkway, and let's say a 4 foot parkway, and people are putting scarlet hawthorns on it. If it's not maintained, it could take out an eye with the thorns. I did put quite a bit along where the path runs on the backside of those buildings. Again, it's kind of like a relationship of vine maple with emerald spreading yew underneath, vinca, some winter creeper, which is also a vine. And on the backside, there's not a lot of room once you get toward the creek side of that path. I did notice that there has been some plantings with the blue tubes back there too. During construction, I'm pretty sure that I'm going to be doing the construction too. Like if I say river birch, I don't know if I would set it exactly where all that is. You might have to tuck it between maybe two of the canopies of the willows are. those willows, I've been on the other side of the property. I own the adjacent piece on the other side of the creek, and I think a Vista would love to just wake up one day and the willows be gone. Same with probably the city department that's in charge of making sure things don't flood. I think it would be quite nice. Back there, I put in spring snow crabapple, which is a true sterile. I put in the dwarf yellow twig and the dwarf red twig dogwoods, which if there is ever any high water, that's just going to be like letting a lab run around the water that we have in these city parks right now. I think a lot of this is going to have to be moved and tweaked because, like I said, I don't know if it was Palouse Clearwater or maybe some of the scout troops or whatever, but you can see the blue tubes all around the trail. They might have put it in not thinking, maybe 18 inches away from the edge of the path, put in a Douglas hawthorn. That really is going to be a problem someday. I put in things that are going to be kind of shade tolerant on that backside because I think it's going to be kind of a dark shaded site along that trail. Mm-hmm. Also, to do a lot with this design, there's not a lot of planting space. It's kind of almost an urban mix, but do a lot with trunk delineation and, like I say, have an overstory and then maybe small flowering shrubs underneath it. I used a lot of shrubs that are going to stay pretty much contained within those planting areas. When we first got the plan from FIRMA, they had met the requirement with the city, how many overstory trees, how many mid-story trees, how many ground covers. So I kind of, since that was passed, I saw where they dropped those trees in. It's just, being in Southern California, they're not aware. They put in columnar ash trees. Any day now we're going to have the ash borer up in Moscow. And I don't know if it's a good idea to, use that as our significant overstory tree. That you drive through Chicago and the Chicago Forest Preserve system, and it looks like an A-bomb went off of all the ash trees that are dead inside the forest preserves. Also, knowing college students, they had things like Oregon grape. Well, if you're at the post office, kind of walk around on the parking lot side and look in some of the beds that still have some Oregon grape in it. It's probably got dried brown leaves that have been there since 1982, probably beer bottles and shopping bags that have blown in there. I'd like to do like a clean development, things that they're going to have to put the snow somewhere. And when that snow melts, either the shrub you put in there is crushed and broken down, or it's going to spring up because it can tolerate snow load. So I tried to design it to where it's not a messy site. I stayed away from any crab apples that were going to have fruit. I did use capital pear, which the fruit is pretty minuscule. Great fall color, which autumn is in Moscow is more dependable than our springs. We could have flowers coming out here in the next 3 or 4 weeks and have a killer frost in late April and May that just kind of kills the buds on the vine. Things like, let's see, what else did I use? I kind of limited to so many of the same type. Like I used capital pear along the highway because it's only going to get 12 feet wide and trucks aren't going to be breaking it. And also ivory silk lilac, which is a charming little medium-sized tree that has great fall color, great charming flowers in the spring. Columnar hornbeam, which has been proven in this town to be one of the best solution trees on these narrow parkways. I put in bullhaul maple, which is going to be more colorful and stay within the planting beds better than some of the other red maples. So where they had included red maples, I just took it and picked out a cultivar that's going to be better in this area. Also, the availability. If it's not grown commercially, it doesn't matter if they found it in Sunset Garden Book if nobody finds it profitable to grow. So I think it's going to be a good mix of flowering shrubs, small evergreens. On the evergreen trees, instead of Scotch pine, I use the Bosnian pine or the subalpine fir, which is going to stay within there and keep a cleaner kind of regiment than they had. Scotch pine, and if you go out to the Elks Golf Course, almost every Scotch pine is at a 60-degree or 45-degree list because big top, narrow taproot, wind that we could have, like our windy Palouse, a lot of leaf litter underneath those type of pines. College students, one cigarette, a whole planting in the corner. If I did use any juniper, it was buffalo juniper or blue rug juniper, which doesn't get higher than a catalog in terms of the height. Also, safety. Hopefully there's a good lighting pattern on that bike path, because when they redid the HUD housing over there off of Cleveland Street and revamped it about 3 or 4 years ago, it was quite a nice update on the landscaping, and the whole neighborhood took that opportunity and started going through that development. I think you'll see, not really gawkers, but I think you'll see a lot more traffic on this part of the bike path now, because there's going to be more interest. I think it's going to be kind of like almost a European type downtown on it. My only concern that I had personally as an adjacent landowner is I had donated bridge timbers for the railroad trestle right behind my shop, and I gave that to the city. Of course, you'll have to deal with Army Corps of Engineers, but it would be really perfect if they could get a pedestrian bridge from Bourbon Creek side. Harrison goes all the way through. It's not vacated. And then if they're going to be doing this, hoof it or bike it, they're going to have to get to either what was Tesoro, but now I think it's Mobile, or they're going to have to get to Safeway to get whatever they need for food or Super Bowl parties. And it would be really nice to get over to the other side. Right now, all there is a willow branch that's grown at a 90-degree, and everybody just kind of does a Huck Finn, Tom Sawyer type of crossing right now. So I think it's going to be a real clean, neat development that's not going to catch litter and vandalism. So.
Any questions for Pat O'Connell while he's up?
Where do you bring your plants in from, Pat?
I mostly just have Gary Gibson, who's probably the most knowledgeable person of every grower. And he does all the buying, like when I did the credit union and now the hospital, he just brings me in from the best growers because you have to get everything passed, so I don't worry about it. So Gary Gibson up on, what is that, Pines Road up there. A lot of landscapers just have Gibsons do their buying for them.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Mike, I do have a question related to the lighting.
Yeah.
Since that's come up, and that was part of the trade with the Parks Department, the arrangement with Parks and Rec. So, what is the? They don't show anything in the renderings, so I'm just wondering.
Yeah, they had, our assistant Parks and Rec director, David Schott, had worked with Aaron, developer of this project, to try to figure out some lighting of that path. What they were what they were running into was just cost. So the fee in lieu of was around $5,500. They were looking at maybe some freestanding lights, and one freestanding light about 20 feet tall within that corridor was going to run about $5,000 to $7,000. So that was the issue they were running into, and then it ended up that Parks and Rec Department just recommended accepting the fee in lieu of, and I think they have some programming as far as lighting along the path that they had planned to do in this area, and they were just going to contribute that money towards some lighting on the path.
You'd think there could be, since the building's so close, you could imagine just a few
Floods off the building.
I'm hoping that you wouldn't do the farm trick and have this blaring light. But, there could be a few, I don't know if they're there or not, but there could be a few lights along the building that would just give ambient light to the path. Because it'll seem, I don't know how many people, I certainly don't use it at night myself, so I don't have a sensibility for that. But it'll want to have some.
Yeah, I think you'll have some ambient light coming off the unit, the dwelling units that are adjacent to that. And so that's what they had discussed, was that there was going to be some type of ambient light from those dwellings. And then, right now they have bollards that are, I think, solar powered. And so if you ride your bike at night or walk that, it's pretty dark, so those don't put off a whole lot of light other than just letting you know you're still on the right path. So it doesn't do very much for lighting the path. So I think they were possibly looking at replacing some of those bollards as well with, running electrical to those, and then putting actual lights that run off electricity instead of solar on those. But I think that they'll just accept the fee in lieu of, and then they'll try to, work with the developer when it's being constructed in order to kind of test the ambient light, and then maybe, put lights here and there depending upon how dark it is.
Yeah, I think several of those bollards would be better than a big tall light, frankly.
Yeah.
Getting it lower down because it's not really. Yeah, it's trying to get a pedestrian level.
To the develop, or as they get working on it, I think it's worth talking about the lighting. I don't know. I hope if you feel comfortable with it, but I think along the path is certainly something to be discussed.
Yeah, and Parks and Rec Commission and the Pathways Commission, they ended up reviewing it, and that's what their recommendation was, that fee in lieu of go towards some type of lighting along the path. Mm-hmm. And so that's what they intend on doing with those fee in lieu of funds in order to do that.
So what are the next steps on this? Because I thought we were a step farther along than we are.
Yeah, this is just, we're at final PUD stage, so we're just comparing the final plans with what they had submitted preliminarily, and just making sure that they're still substantially consistent with those plans. And so it's just a review by the commission. So it's not a public hearing. It's just more of a staff commission review of the plans, just to make sure they're in conformity with the 5 conditions as well. So,
Rob,
Mike, has anybody looked at how the property fared with the high water in Paradise Creek these last couple of weeks? I guess it was up at flood stage, I believe. Is there any assessment of how that would impact where those buildings are so close to the? I don't know if the water came over the path, for example. But
I don't think it did. They did some work to elevate this site previously, so it's about a foot above base flood elevation.
Yeah, because it talks about 2 feet above base flood elevation. So.
Yeah, all the slabs of the foundations of all the buildings that are in the floodplain need to be elevated 2 feet above base flood elevation. And so that's the 2 feet to account for freeboard, which is a log gets jammed in the channel and ends up overflowing, in an area which, wouldn't typically cause that. So
that's 100
that's why
year
they
flood,
have. That's
or-
why we have the 2 feet.
Okay.
Typically, FEMA requires 1 foot, but we go an additional 1 foot to bring it up to 2 feet. So right now, it meets FEMA requirements. So there shouldn't be any standing water on that site right now.
Okay. Wendy, could I ask
Yes,
one
yes.
other question? This isn't something that I suppose that we're really considering, but when Pat mentioned snow removal, and I'm looking at the parking lot, I'm going, my gosh, how are they going to?
Yep, where are they going to put it?
What are they going to do, given the piles that could accumulate? Is there a requirement for them to have a snow removal plan with the way they're designing the parking lot?
That isn't a city code requirement that they have a plan. No.
But there is, could you go to the last, right there on that, where those plantings are to the very right, if you look at parking lot, it's just a break right there. I mean, that whole area where that, what was it, Building E was going to be?
Mm-hmm.
That could be snow dumping area.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'd imagine that they would probably end up piling it in that corner.
Yeah.
So probably
Okay.
push it all the way and then pile it up here onto the east side.
So, I had a couple
Yes,
of quick
Kurt.
questions. Oh,
Go ahead.
okay. One's just my own curiosity. So what is the looped water mains? What does that mean, actually, exactly?
Well, a lot of times to serve a development, they'll just, off of the city main, so you have 95, they'll take another main that needs to be sized, and so that if it's the correct size, it has to be a city main, and they have to have an easement for it. So oftentimes they'll just tee off of the main on 95, and then they'll go in, and then they'll run private lines off of the city main that's on the property. Well, in this case, they have to create a loop that ties back out with the main on 95.
Okay.
So it'll be like a horseshoe loop that'll go through. It'll probably follow the path or the drive aisle design.
Yeah, okay.
You know, so it'll come in from here, it'll loop around, and ended up going back out and tying back in with the main.
Yeah, okay.
And
Okay.
Scott, you had a question?
Well,
Oh, sorry. Kurt.
Oh, sorry.
I actually have quite a bit more in my PowerPoint.
Oh, okay, why don't you-
presentation, too.
Let's, yeah, I'll surrender and let's do that.
Unless you got a question, Scott?
Yeah, I'm a little late to the party. You guys have seen this before, but I'm trying to get my head around how 2 zip cars and bike racks can justify a 47% reduction in parking.
Fair question. It came up in the last hearing, and it's a leap of faith, in a sense, of a cultural change given the site's proximity to campus, and it's somewhat of an experiment.
But do we see that other property owners might come back and say, hey, I'm going to provide
That's
2
a good
zip cars and
Right.
Well, they
some bike
certain-
racks
yeah,
and
they
build
cer-
more.
Yeah. I mean, they certainly have that option. So they went through a PUD in order to, achieve this parking mitigation plan was part of the reason. But, you look to the area, being direct, I think part of this is consideration of the area where they're at. So right across from the University of Idaho campus, this is more of a development driven towards U of I students. You have Legacy Crossing, which is directly across the street, where we have a 50% reduction in parking if you were to develop right across the street. You also have a comp plan designation of urban mixed, which also calls for a reduction in parking just because of, trying to create more of an urban feel, urban development, because this area is so close to downtown and the university. It was really the intention to promote urban development, and that's one of the, I guess, the restrictions to doing that is surface parking. And so, that's why in Legacy Crossing we have that no parking requirement for retail uses and restaurant uses, but residential requires parking, but it's at a 50% reduction in what you would normally be required. So, and then looking at, there's always a potential for overflow onto adjacent neighborhoods. That's always a concern. this scenario, you have, it's kind of isolated because you've got 95 on the west side, you've got the creek, and you've got Highway 8 on the north side. You have other apartment complexes that, could potentially be affected if they were to start overflowing and parking in their parking lots. But the next adjacent street is Henley Street, which is about a block up the street across from Sunset Mart. So, a lot of this is kind of the developer taking their own risk for not maybe providing the parking that their tenants would like to see, and part of that was willing to accept that risk of quite a bit less parking. But yeah, they have no bicycle parking requirement. They ended up providing 250 bike parking spaces. 150 of those are long-term, so they built a new external building here that has 150 spaces in there. They provided 2 zip cars, and then they provided all the other bike parking throughout the development. And so, yeah, certainly if any other developer wants to look at all those mitigation factors, we'd be happy to entertain any type of proposal like that, and it'd be up to the commission to approve. But given all those factors of its proximity and the mitigation plan, and they had a traffic study where they had kind of national averages about what parking requirements were, and kind of a demographic trend of, not to say it's reached Moscow yet, but nationwide of a reduction in students that are wanting to bring their car to school and on campus. And so it was many factors that went into allowing that reduction. But yeah, it's largely a bit of a risk to see how it works. We don't oftentimes kids bring their cars to school, and if you restrict them and to say they can't bring them, or you charge for it, then I think you start to have a little bit of a mind shift with thinking twice about bringing their car if they're going to have an issue storing it somewhere. So
wasn't the other condition that as part of the lease agreement, if they parked on the property, they had to have a designated spot that was part of that agreement, and then if they didn't, they have to agree that they won't park on the site. I remember reading that in the material. So.
But if they don't park on site, where do they park?
Probably at U of I in the blue lots would be my guess.
Blue lots are not allowed to park overnight.
Oh, they aren't?
I checked that today.
Oh, yeah, I was curious about that.
Yeah, they used to be able to.
Yeah,
It used to be able to, but
used to just be the
that's
gold
changed.
lots. You couldn't, but
And then is there a mechanism for the city to, if the zip cars don't work, 5 years from now, what happens? If the zip cars were not effective or didn't pan out as far as the viability of them, is that going to increase the parking and the demand for like Gritman's parking lot or off-street parking?
Yeah, that would just be an ongoing obligation of the developer to maintain those zip cards. We have that condition that was on the preliminary PUD that required 2 zip cars, but allowed staff to take a look at the usage after 2 years, and if they were underutilized, then they could potentially reduce that down to 1, but in no circumstance would they be able to eliminate them from the development. That was just part of the approval, was that they would be required to pretty much have some type of car share in perpetuity on that property.
So I guess my question, Walter, how intense was the discussion back in June, or when we passed this, when it got to you at City Council? Did you talk about the parking at length?
I don't remember it.
This only goes to planning and zoning.
It didn't come to us.
yeah.
Oh, it didn't come to you?
Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about it a lot, and it's certainly it's a bit of a risk. On the other hand, this firm has experience in they're from California, where there's cars are a dime a dozen, and so because of the location, because of the unusual nature of the site, I think if this had been just a standard site, if you go out to the Grove, let's say, it's just a big deal, and it doesn't get any special consideration. But trying to develop this piece of land on the corner has been really tricky, at least in my efforts with the people who sell commercial land. You know, it's been really a hard thing. So we were kind of excited to take a small risk and see how this sort of thing would really work.
Well, they made the developer, my understanding is, that developed several similar developments in proximity to other college campuses, and one being, I think, Cal Poly or San Luis Obispo. And with maybe the climate is better, but the proximity and the walkability of that community is horrible compared to here in terms of where this is located. So I think they were, and maybe some in Oregon as well. I'm trying to remember where else they had them.
Yeah,
but that was their argument, that they've been successful with this model, and so they want to try it here. And you know, I think given the location of their proposed development, it's about as good a location to try something like this as you can hope for, you know, and see if it works. And if it doesn't, we learned something. Yes, Walter.
Mike says that they're going to charge $25 per space per month to park. Now realize you've got people that will not buy a $5 per month permit to park at the U of I. They will park and walk. So the $25 would be a pretty good incentive that I really need a car.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I think that probably is worth more than faith in terms of what they're going to really do with this thing. Mm-hmm. And like I say, I went over and saw parking today, and I was afraid this was going to bleed over onto the lots right across the street at U of I.
Exactly.
But they can't leave them overnight.
And that's a change. That's a change in UI policy. Is the developer aware of that? Because they talked about some negotiation with U of I.
Yeah, that's a recent. I think it was within the last year that they ended up changing that.
Yeah.
I think
they have not talked to Becky Couch. She only knows about this because she worked for the city last year. So she has had no contact with them as the U of I parking director.
Okay.
All right, so we should give Mike a chance to.
So, as you recall, we had the PUD bonus density here, and it was previously at 24 dwelling units per acre. It has a combination of general business, motor business, and R4 zones across this particular property. It's about 6 acres in size, and that equates to 145 dwelling units as the base density. They had originally proposed 154, which required about a 7% increase or bonus density to be awarded, which the commission ended up awarding that. The final PUD is now below the base density of 145, and they're coming at 132. So they, if they would have gone through at the preliminary stage, they wouldn't have needed any type of bonus credit in order to achieve the density that they're proposing. So the commission awarded 3% for the additional landscaping along the path. And then they awarded 4% for green building bonuses. So there was numerous energy conservation, green building provisions. They had proposed to eliminate, since they don't require a bonus anymore, they wanted to eliminate some of those. I think the insulation was coming in at a really high cost. I think that, we're, R19, R21 here, depending upon the wall or the ceiling. And in California, I think that's a lesser standard. So they were just assuming that they were going to, doing an R19 was going to exceed the minimum requirements. And so when they were informed that that's actually the minimum here, and they had to go above that in order to satisfy this, they ran the numbers, and it was going to be a substantial amount for that additional insulation. So that's one of the factors that they're looking at, hoping the commission eliminates or allowing them to eliminate.
Hopefully breaking in with just a brief question here.
Sure.
So it's most of the insulation that they're proposing to eliminate is just the wall insulation?
Yeah, it was. I think we require R21 on the ceiling and R19 on the exterior, and they were planning on doing what we require. It's just that they were below that where they typically build, I think, in California.
Probably tips it into a wider wall to get up higher, and that really ups the cost. It would be my guess.
Yeah.
So.
I'm sorry, just so I'm
Rob,
clear,
yeah.
they're still required to meet that minimum standard, correct? We're not allowing them to do something below the minimum 19 and 21?
No, we're not.
Okay.
Yeah, that's building code. We
They just didn't
can't, we
want to
can't waive
exceed
that.
it since they were
Right.
exceeding something
Okay.
that they thought was
Yeah.
already
Yeah.
exceeding.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure they weren't asking us for something
Oh.
less than that. Okay.
Walter, yes.
If I may, Mike, go on your unit count, that 132. I was doing the math here on how many bedrooms they've got. Are they counting on 2 people per bedroom? Is that the plan?
I don't know that
They have a bathroom per bedroom. So does every single student get a bedroom and a bathroom? Or is it 2 people per bedroom?
It's usually a single. Yeah, 1 person per.
Apparently the new trend. You
I
want
mean,
your
I don't know,
own-
I was just-
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're going to have, you're counting the bedrooms. That can't be right. I had to hit a wrong button.
Aren't they counting the units?
Units and
Might-
bedrooms are
Two different things.
So that's
Yeah.
why I was asking about the bedrooms, because they've got more units with several bedrooms now than they did, and I presume that the number of bedrooms is the
397 bedrooms.
Because they reconfigured the size of the unit, number of
That's why I
bedrooms
asked
per
Mike
unit.
if the bedrooms count probably stayed pretty close to the same, even though the number of units shifted a little bit.
So you said 392?
97.
97 and 200 and something parking places, right? 202 or,
Yeah.
I can't remember. So it's about
Got it right here. Yep.
a little bit.
So, the off-street parking, required automobile parking. So, with the preliminary PUD, they're required to have 402 per city code. Final PUD with that change in bedroom counts, that'd be 404. Provided parking, preliminary, they had shown 214 spaces, which is approximately 47%, 46.7% reduction. Is what they were awarded. The final PUD is 213 spaces, so it's a little over 47% reduction. So a fairly minor, slight change there with the numbers. Bicycle parking, preliminary, they had 258 spaces. 130 of those were long-term, 128 were short-term. And the final is 262. 134 of those is long-term, are long-term, and 128 are short-term. So have a slight increase with the bicycle parking that they're providing.
I have a question about that. How many of those are covered? I know there's a bicycle building, but then in addition to that, are the other ones racks on site, or are they
The
covered?
long-term ones are all covered.
Okay, yeah.
So those are the ones that are located inside on the corridors of,
Okay.
so like the stairwell corridors. They have some there. So reviewing our 5 conditions, we had the 2 car shares. They've indicated on the plans that they're providing 2 car shares as part of the project. We had that condition about working with Parks and Rec Department to satisfy the parkland dedication. Got a memo from Dwight Curtis, the Parks and Rec Director, saying that they're wanting to accept the fee in lieu of to work on improvements for lighting for the path. Developer needs to work with ITD to mitigate any impact to the transportation system in the area. We had a question. So this is a plan from ITD regarding the intersection. So you're looking north is to the right of your screen. This is Sweet Avenue. This is going into the development, and this is South 95 here. So this is just, they were required per the traffic impact study in order to put in a designated left-hand turn lane. So you see that in the center of the street. That is not currently right there. There was enough width from curb to curb, so there isn't any type of modification that's needed to the path or the sidewalk that's on that east side of the street. So they can restripe it, get the 2 northbound 12-foot lanes, 2 southbound 12-foot lanes, left-hand southbound turn lane that's 11 feet wide, and then a 12-foot wide dedicated right turn lane that's currently there. And so they have enough space. They'll just need to restripe that, and so that'll satisfy that left-hand turn southbound requirement. There will be some widening that'll be needed. Currently, there's just 2 lanes going into that old Domino's Pizza property. They'll need to widen this, and so that'll probably require the relocation of some utility boxes as they shift that intersection to align more with Sweet Avenue. Right now, I think the curb comes out to about right here. And so you have kind of a misalignment, so they'll need to shift that to the north a little bit, make that 3 lanes, so you'll have an ingress, and then you'll have 2 egress. You'll have a southbound left-hand turn lane, and then you'll have a right turn and a through lane on the north side there. So this is what their civil had drawn. So you have the ingress, and then you've got the 2 egress with the southbound, and then the northbound, and then the straight through Sweet Avenue. So nothing, it's not going to affect the sidewalks or the path in any way. It'll just end up shifting and taking out the portion of sidewalk that's on that property, and then possibly relocating these utility boxes there. But the arm for the light is currently on this south side and extends over, so that's on the south, and that won't need to be relocated either. So. And then our 4th condition was that public utilities be in those utility easements, and Public Works has verified that via the construction drawings. And then the last one about looping the water line through the development. And so we have a model that we've been running for our consultants with the city, and it looks like they're going to have to loop that through the development. And so that's what they're planning on with the construction drawings. So Public Works has indicated that that'll be satisfied. And it brings us to staff's recommendation. And so, with final PUDs, we've reviewed it, and to us, it's our opinion that it's substantially unchanged from what was provided during the preliminary approval. And it's our recommendation the Commission approve the final PUD with no conditions. I'd certainly be able to answer any questions you might have.
Okay. Any further questions for Mike? Yes, Walter.
Just to close the loop, the original preliminary was 398 bedrooms. The new one is 397.
Okay, so, yeah. Thank you. Are there questions or comments, or?
No, I don't have any.
Yeah, I think that's the only thing in my mind is the parking issue, but that's kind of a done deal.
Done deal, yep.
Yeah. I mean, it is. If it was smack in the middle of a regular residential neighborhood, I would think it's a disaster.
I wouldn't want to be Charlie Bond.
Scott, we
Right?
I mean, really.
we spent a lot of time with it, and it's an intriguing issue. I think the unit, because of the location of it, there aren't many easy places to just park, if you know what I'm saying. In other words, a few people came in and were worried about it, but because you can't get across the highway, it isn't going to be easy to just ooze out into the neighborhood. I mean, think about my own house. People, 6 kids rent a house across the street from me, and next thing you know, there's no on-street parking because they're full every day. I don't think it's not going to be easy for them to ooze over in across the highway just because it's going to make it really hard to get to. So how this works, it's going to be very interesting. And because the firm,
kids are leaving their cars at home yet. I really am not sold that kids are leaving their cars at home and coming to the University of Idaho without a car.
Well, anecdotally speaking, I've run into another one, and what's surprising to me is not so much that there are students that don't have cars, but they're actually students that have no desire to have a car. I mean, I was carless for 4 years when I was going to college, and I would have given one of my kidneys to have a car.
In as much as we can attract, and I think typically we attract probably rural kids who would be, like you and me, think that a car is the only possible life. It's taken a lifetime for me to realize that's not the case. I had to live in New York City for a a year to get it through my head that you could live a different way.
Well, as a college student in Philadelphia, you could leave. Nobody owned cars because you could leave them on the street for about 5 minutes before the battery is gone and the tires were gone. And nobody had cars. But there is
That's what we need, more street crime.
At any rate, one thing I would point out, because I share your concerns, and I did in the first preliminary hearing, but I think also we have Legacy Crossing, which is right across the street, which has essentially fewer requirements for parking by about 3% than this development proposes. I don't see a whole lot of difference between the location of this site and Legacy Crossing, and yet that went through, those regulations are in place. And so in a sense, this is a good place to maybe test out whether Legacy Crossing design guidelines will actually work. It's our first real foray into this type of development, and yet we've designated a whole lot of land across the highway for exactly the same purpose, or similar purposes. So because of that, I guess I'm willing to say, okay, maybe there is a change. And also, there's the argument that tuition has gone up so much and college debt has gotten so significant that students are less likely to take on also the ownership of a car on top of that. And whether that's true or not, I think it is in a lot of places. I think, I could see it at Cal Poly or something, where parking is really at a premium. But I don't know if it's here yet, but it seems like it might attract a segment of the population at U of I that would be willing to live without a car. So I don't know.
One of the other things that I might mention, Scott, that there were some residents that are on the north side, on the other side of the Highway 8, and they expressed some concerns, but in the end, nobody objected because they received some assurances that if it began to be a problem with people parking over there, the city would be taking a look at that and working with the owners to find a way to eliminate that as a problem. So in the end, we debated this significantly, and all of us had concerns, but I agree with Wendy. In the end, we all thought that, let's give this a try. If not here, where?
Right.
So, but the issues that you're raising, we really spent a lot of time working through them.
And I think, didn't we have a final vote that we post Mike's phone number too, in case there are any parking problems?
Well, we do have an interesting high school situation that
illustrates
causes,
the parking
causes
capacity of the Moscow Street every day.
we're surviving, though I'm sure that the closer you live to the high school, the less well you think the survival is going.
Right.
But at any rate.
So we need a motion.
Yeah, I would make a motion that we approve it.
Okay, is there
And I
a
second
second? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
I oppose, I guess. Abstentions, I think the motion carries. So now, do we need any relevant, not at this point, that's for the plan unit development. So when would, for the public hearing, when would that occur?
There is no public hearing.
There's no public hearing on
The
it?
preliminary PUD was the public hearing.
Oh, okay, I thought we had to have another one. I'm sorry, I misunderstood that. So I've been, all right, so we're just, now it goes on to city council, and
Now it goes on to construction.
it doesn't have to go through, okay. I'm learning these procedures that I didn't know.
The power of P&Z, right?
Yeah.
Well, we have some power over something I didn't know.
But
That.
it's a type 1 PUD, so it doesn't involve a
We don't
subdivision
have much
plat.
power.
I see.
So if it
Okay.
involves a subdivision plat, we'd have it similar to going through a subdivision plat. It'd have to go to council.
Right, and I thought, yeah, okay, and I gotcha. I'm sorry, this is my first one of this
Oh, that's sorry.
type, so learning every day.
Just realize if the parking goes south, don't come to council because we didn't do it.
Well, I think it's a test balloon. It's a trial balloon.
Do we have to let Scott off the hook? Do we say, okay, don't call Scott, call Kirk?
Yeah, it's a trial balloon. You're right, Walter.
No, my
And, don't call me either.
I went
All right.
by the book on parking.
So do you want to stay up there for the next item on the agenda?
Yeah,
Okay, the off-street parking standards ordinance, and we'll move on to that.
Okay, so we talked about last time about increasing the island requirement when it kicks in to 30 from the 20, and then also having some flexibility with, like, for instance, Charlie Bond's parking lot to the south in order to determine that was actually 2 parking lots for the purposes of internal landscaping. So I made those requirements here, but, you know, just going through and looking at these large paragraphs that we have, I just ended up breaking some of these out into sub-bullets. So, you know, those are changes that I've made just for formatting. So, you know, taking what we currently have just with the purpose, application, and placement within exterior landscaping, and just shifting that and just so breaking it out into these bullet points, which I think is probably a lot easier to read when you do it that way. So that's really the only minor change within this section. And then with the interior landscaping, we ended up, you know, starting to get a pretty big paragraph. And once you have multiple requirements within a large paragraph, sometimes you know, it's hard to read, and you know, miss some things. So I ended up breaking that out just like the other section. And so what I ended up doing was changing the parking lots containing 30 or more stalls shall include interior landscaping, so increasing that from the 20 that we previously had. And then including a statement just saying that, you know, I wanted to put that out there that multiple parking lots on a single piece of property are counted separately. So if you've got one at the front, one at the back, you know, we would say that that's not one parking lot, they're 2 separate parking lots, just for clarity, you know, just to put that out there. So multiple parking lots on a single property are counted separately for the purpose of interior landscaping. And then the zoning administrator may determine that parking lots that are separate but connected by travel aisles may still be counted separately for the purpose of interior landscaping requirements. So I put that flexibility in there so we could look at, you know, Chuck's Bond scenario and you know, when they change directions from horizontal to vertical and they're connected by a travel aisle, to be able to make that interpretation. So I changed that, and then just listed, these are all the same requirements, just listed those out in bullet form. And then we were working on a figure 1 to show that, so we had that referenced in subsection V or 4 here. So landscape islands adjacent to a double row of parking stalls as shown in figure 1 below shall contain 2 trees of 1 1/2 inch caliper. So that's just showing that diagram that we always intended. I finally had some time to put that diagram.
Yeah, that really helps.
That diagram together. So to get an idea of what that would look like. So I think that pretty much wraps up, you know, unless anybody else has any comments with this section. I think we're, you know, pretty much wrapped up. You know, and looking back through the section, I think it's always been a bit of a challenge for us to convey accessibility requirements, so ADA spaces, you know, because they're all in a separate book. They have ANSI requirements. Some of them are in a building code. Some are in the ANSI book, and we just reference them. And then so it's, you know, we don't have a printout we can give people that shows what the dimensions are. So usually we're telling people what the dimensions are and hoping that they get it right when we go out to inspect it. And so I worked on these images to put in the code, you know, right next to where we have our parking lot dimensional standards. So this will just be showing, you know, having a figure that shows the van accessible space, 8-foot wide stall, 8-foot wide aisle, 20-foot deep, wheel stop, sign, and then the standard accessible stall that has a 5-foot aisle on it, and then the sign diagram, because the bottom of the sign to the grade of the stall has to be a certain height, and it can't be below that. Oddly enough, they don't specify a maximum height, so I guess technically you could have the thing 30 feet tall and it'd still be compliant, but they just have this minimum. So just have that diagram, and then it's hard to see, but this is the ADA parking schedule. So you're required to have one ADA spot as your first spot. So if you're required to have one stall as part of your development, it's got to be an ADA stall. So this just goes through, you know, stalls 1. If you have up to 25 on your property, you're only required to have 1 ADA space. Once you go 26 to 50, you got 2, and then so on and so on. So this is pretty much straight out of the building code. but you have these in certain areas, and they're hard to pull together and convey to people. So I think it's good just to have more pictures, and be able to hand this page out to people, and so they get the requirements and could get it right the first time. So I think that we'd be making this change, and I think that'd be pretty much the last change, and hopefully ready to go to a public hearing on the ordinance here. I think we'll have one more draft. I need to draft the whereas statements at the beginning. But so next time, I hope to have a completed ordinance. We can take one more look at it, and then hope to notice it for public hearing after that.
Okay, sounds good. So you're thinking maybe the end of April we'll do public hearing, or probably? Yeah,
when we get the 15-day notice, so it may be beginning of May, end of April. I can go ahead and notice it if everything, I'm not hearing any other changes, so I could go ahead and notice it for the second meeting in April.
Well, it seemed like being part of the parking subcommittee that was really only one concern, and they had a lot of good suggestions, and so that would be the one issue that would come up, and we sort of proposed a compromise in this, and if that's acceptable, then I don't know how the rest of you feel, but I'm pretty comfortable with it at this point because I think it's been studied pretty thoroughly. Everybody else feel?
No, I think we're ready to go.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Well, I can go ahead and notice it for that second meeting in April,
Great.
And then we have one more chance to take a look at it at the first meeting and
Perfect.
proceed that way.
Sounds good.
And then the next two items, the comp plan updates, wasn't really able to do any additional work. We've been under a pretty heavy workload right now, so I haven't got to that. I did talk to Les about the multimodal plan and the functional classifications of the roadways, and they do have a plan that was slightly different than the multimodal plan that they had worked with Transportation Commission. So he's going to get me their final recommendation, and so we'll be able to review that at the next meeting.
Okay. And pertinent to that, because Greg had requested readings on multimodal. I did some searching around and sent something for you to look at first, but
I saw it, but
it was for small communities, so that it might have some relevance for us. And okay.
And then the use table, I think we talked about last time about categorizing that and restructuring it, and I haven't got to that yet either. So hope to have that. We have, I think, 2 weeks instead of one for the next P&Z meeting, so we'll have a little bit of extra time.
Right.
So I hope to have that done as well.
Okay. Well, thank you for. Anybody else have any comments on anything? I guess we need a
Quick end, wasn't it?
I
want to just share pictures of our building.
Okay, and I apologize for not realizing how the PUD process worked. That was a new one for
picture. I'm in love with this building, but the other night, walking out, I couldn't believe with the lights on, and so I made these pictures to share with you because I know you've seen the building. I've only been in this building now for 21 or 22 years, but I never see it in that exact way, and somehow the lighting, and you just walk through life and don't pay any attention, and you just look at this and think, my gosh, are we is that us in Moscow? And I think it is us. And so I just thought I'd share it with you. This is just taken with my phone, as I was walking by. But it's just the pleasure of being in this building.
It really is spectacular.
Part of it is the good old days when guys worked for $5 a day.
Well, this was government, this is back in the days when government really did some cool stuff for you. It's my opinion that this may be the finest building in town. Forget the university. I don't think anything on the campus is any more well constructed. But it's a different style than some other things. Anyway, I just, I thought it was such a pleasure to see that I thought I'd just share it with you.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Okay, well, it looked like it was going to be a really long agenda and ended up just, go.
I'll try not to be too disappointed, Mike.
No, I mean, in terms of the other items that we still need to look at, so, yeah.
Well, I think
But we've moved along pretty well on
I think
most of them.
We'll probably have a long one the next meeting. We've got the 6 and Jackson project, so it'll be the first project in Legacy Crossing. We'll review the design guidelines for that. So, that'll be it. And then hope to have all the rest of the items.
Oh, you're talking for the comp plan, yeah.
Yeah, and then I think Harvest Hills final plat will come as well. So we'll have quite a few things next time. So.
Okay. Well, meeting adjourned. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.